Good afternoon. Welcome to you all. I'm Gillian Joseph. Welcome to the second of our Future Talks sessions this afternoon. We're going to be looking at farming with some industry movers and shakers. Now, from ancient practices rooted in tradition to cutting-edge innovations driven by necessity, farming is undergoing a transformation like no other. Faced with global challenges from climate change and soil degradation to food insecurity and shifting consumer demands, the agricultural landscape is at a pivotal juncture. This discussion, we hope, will open the gate to explore how technology, sustainability and community-driven solutions are reshaping what it means to grow, harvest and nourish. As we till the soil of possibility, what seeds should we plant for a more resilient and inclusive farming future? So I want you to start by introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit more about yourselves. So Andy, you kick off.
Well, I began life as a musician, and I can confirm, having tried both making music and farming, that making music's a lot easier. And so my sort of life turned on its head about 17 years ago now, when I read an article on the way back from a gig about the environmental consequences of food production. I never really thought about that much before. And what began as a quest for self-sufficiency, my first experience of planting seeds when I was about 35, turned into a spectacular-sized rabbit hole, which culminated, as you said, in selling my publishing rights to purchase a farm in France, try and do this at scale, a very humbling lesson along the way there. And eventually, once you see the potential of what our food system could be, trying to do it on a big scale here in the UK with Wildfarmed.
OK, Farmer Will.
So as what was said, my name is Will Young, but online and digital Farmer Will. So I'm a 6th-gen farmer. And I work on the farm with my dad, and also went on Love Island, which was a major contrast between working 7 days a week, getting shouted at by my dad for not working hard enough, to being in South Africa and being in swimwear. But coming off the show, went straight back into lambing, went straight back into the farm, and carrying on the farming legacy for myself and my family.
Thank you. Dr. Emma Keller.
Hi everybody, and many of you know me. I'm Emma, I'm the Head of Sustainability across Nestlé UK and Ireland. I've been working in food systems for quite a long time now. I really am passionate about it because I think if I asked anybody who's involved in food, we'd all put our hands up because we all eat food every single day, and I really believe in the power of it to drive change. I spent a lot of my youth on a farm in Ireland, so quite different, but also sheep, so we can compare notes, and just have a real passion for nature and what we can do as a food business to drive change.
Thank you. So let's kick off with you first of all, Andy. How would you describe the state of farming at the moment? Is it in a healthy place?
Well, the short answer would be no, but I think it's a bit more nuanced than that. I think that for a variety of historical, socio and economic reasons, food and farming and farmers have been pushed to a way of growing food which is essentially that suppresses nature. And that has had quite profound consequences for the state of play today in terms of biodiversity and health and our ability to be resilient in the face of a changing climate. And farmers have been pushed to the absolute limit of financial tolerance. So that you could say that's quite a sort of bleak picture. But the corollary is also true, that we now know how to farm in a way which is a collaboration with nature that can be a massive part of reversing our biodiversity, climate and health crises, and we know how to do it. So if we can make that case, then I think actually the future of farming could be really exciting, and farmers could become the properly rewarded and respected stewards that they should be.
Mm. Will, do you see your role as collaborating with nature in your farming methods and how you operate?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the main things, speaking to farmers, locally to me and around the place, it's actually quite difficult to make change on farm. One of the reasons, well, the main reasons, is actually the older generation not wanting to make change. Myself and my family had a bit of a different approach. My dad and my grandfather had it where my granddad wouldn't let my dad take over and farm. My dad was probably about 30, 40 years old, and he was like, well, I've had all of this years, you're not giving me my independence almost. And it actually caused my dad walking away from the farm at one point and said, look, I'm not coming back until you let me farm how I want to farm. And that happens all over the place with the older generation not actually stepping down. So with me coming through, my dad was very open to change, innovations, different things that we can do to help with the soil, help how we farm, make it better for the environment. And I think you're actually seeing that with a lot more younger people coming through, if that's due to TikTok, Instagram, online. People are wanting to make that change.
Emma, I'm going to ask you the same question as I did to Andy, really, where you see that the state of farming at the moment. Is it in a healthy position?
I think for us as Nestlé, we absolutely care about farmers a huge amount because as a food business, we depend on the ingredients that they produce for the nutritional things that make up our products. So it's really important. I think one thing we've seen a lot more of is it used to be completely disconnected. It was farmers over there, processors, us in the supply chain, and we didn't know our farmers. And we're coming now into a stage where we understand them more, we talk to them, we understand their context. And what we are seeing is that they're struggling, whether it's policy changes, it's volatile commodity markets, or it's like the summer we've had this summer where we've not had any rain, it feels like almost until today. That's a real struggle for farmers on a day-to-day basis. And so we know farming is changing, the pressures are only growing. I think what we're really interested in is how we can help support them. Because as I say, if farmers fail, so too does businesses like ours.
Andy, specifically, what is the support that you feel you would need?
Well, I mean, I'm a tenant farmer for the National Trust, and beyond that, in our Wildfarmed community, we work with 150 farmers up and down the country now. And what we've found, and that came from my experience in France when I took on this farm in France. I had a very humbling experience about the vast array of skills required to be a farmer, that I didn't have them, how hard it is to grow food on sort of post-green revolution, so degraded soils, and trying to work out ways to bring food and nature back together again as they need to be. So what we found, trying to make sure that lonely path could be less lonely, is one, a real sense of community and shared mission, collective learning amongst all of our farmers. Obviously, the economics need to make sense because ultimately you get what you incentivize, and it can only be that way. And the last piece, these are arable producers I'm talking about, which has been really important, is that the vast majority of arable farmers never eat what they've grown because they're commodities. You sell your wheat, barley, oats into who knows where, and it goes into the global commodity market. And what we have done to join up consumers and farmers is a traceable supply chain. And the impact that our farmers have experienced in going to a supermarket or wherever, buying a wild farm loaf and eating it, has had a transformational impact on how you think about your relationship with the land and how you want to grow food.
So that's interesting. So you said the majority of farmers don't consume the
vast majority, yeah.
That's so interesting.
And we see it actually when we visit farmers. They love to get a box of shredded wheat out or Cheerios and be like, we think our wheat goes into this product, but we can't be sure. Because Andy says it goes into a big grain merchant and then they don't see where it goes to. So by connecting our supply chain more, and we can try and see where those products are going. We've got a really good example with milk. We've been working with our milk supplier in the UK for about 21 years, and we know exactly which milk farms go into our York factory that make Kit Kat and into our factory in Dalston that make frothy coffee. And those farmers are so proud. One thing they really ask us for is, can we have a sign on our farm that says where their products go to? So it's something that's really important for farmers to feel connected. Much like when we do our homework, we like to know where it goes and who's looking at it. Farmers do the same.
Will, do you feel connected with your supply chain?
We sell, so we've just got sheep on the farm, so it is just predominantly livestock. And you go into a market and you sell your lamb to a market. However, what happens after that, the connection isn't there. It is a little bit disconnected.
Is that something that you think you would benefit from, knowing how the supply chain is joined up and where where your produce actually ends up.
Yeah, 100%. I think, especially, we're not exactly sure where our produce goes, but I'd love to be in a position where I'm like, all of our, let's say, lamb is British made and it goes into British stores, and it's like that sense of feeling of feeding the country, where it is a little bit disconnected in the sense. And I think it was very disconnected with consumers and producers actually knowing where food comes from. But I feel like in the last couple of years, people are understanding and actually wanting to learn a little bit more. Where is your food coming from? What are you putting inside of your body? I think I think, you know, social media plays a massive part in that. Clarkson's Farm, which I'm sure a lot of you have watched as well, plays a massive...
Or been on.
Yeah, which plays a massive part. People actually want to know where food comes from now.
And is that something that you've experienced? I mean, do you involve maybe, I don't know, schools or children coming to your farm to see, you know, where the food that they eat and ends up on their dining table, where it actually comes from?
Well, we do. In fact, we've got 2 massive open days this week, so there'll be 400 people tomorrow and 400 people the day after. And we have found that of all of the things that we've done to try and democratise this really hopeful message that our food and farming choices are our greatest point of agency for biodiversity, for climate change resilience, for health, the single most effective thing is to get people into fields and show them what you mean, and move from fields in which you can hear a pin drop to fields that are full of life, and explain to, you know, bakers, if you use this flour rather than that flour, you're turning this into this, or food businesses, your procurement budgets change landscapes. They're the only thing that can change landscapes. So it's getting out there, there's nothing quite like it.
Really interesting. That's huge, open day, 400 people.
Yeah, and that's why I'm looking slightly wild-eyed and anxious.
Wild-eyed and anxious. You mentioned climate change. If we can sort of talk a little bit about that and how it might affect farming practices and different types of crops, if you want to come in on that.
Yeah, the food system is the 3rd biggest contributor to greenhouse gases, about 30% of the total global carbon footprint. So it's absolutely enormous. But at the same time, it's in a really unique position. Not only is it currently part of the problem, it can be a huge part of the solution. And that's because of the power of land and agriculture to restore carbon, to pull it back down into the soil, back into the trees and the hedges that you'll be planting on your farms, etc. So that's the role we see as a food company, is how do we make food part of the solution and not part of the problem? On the flip side then, we're currently facing into climate change, not in 5 years' time in 2030 or 2050, but today, now, and we're seeing farmers really struggle with that. We've lost the predictability of seasons and rainfall, which makes it hard to plan. I heard a farmer I spoke with on a panel during Climate Action Week talk about his friends were taking the mick out of him in the pub for being so obsessed about the weather. And he was like, me turning a profit, I've got 6 days of rain, and if that rain doesn't come, I will lose and I will be in debt that year. Imagine our salaries being dependent on the rain. It would not be great. And I think that's what we don't realise that farmers are going through, because that's what climate change is doing to them. So I think there's a role for us to play as a business in how do we support them, how do we help build resilience, because ultimately this is about ensuring farmers who are farming today can farm into the future, and businesses like us that are buying ingredients can buy them today and into the future as well.
Andy, how much does climate change affect your crop selection and your means of operating? How much are you at the behest of the weather?
Well, I mean, 100%, you know, but I think it's, and this is why I think this sort of community support is so important, because ultimately, I mean, there's an opportunity and there's a crisis. The crisis is that we have soils that are in poor shape, generally speaking, and that means that they can't infiltrate and hold on to rainfall. Now, if you can't hold on to rainfall in a climate that's gone from basically sunshine and showers to prolonged rain followed by prolonged sunshine, there is no food supply chain. There is no farming. And yet we know how to turn that around. And yet farmers are on the front line of financial crisis the whole time. And it's very hard to take anything other than a short-term decision if you're right up against it, even if you know that that short-term decision is going to make the long-term position worse. This is why we've got to join up the economics so that we incentivise the right choices. And in this case, I was making the point at Parliament recently that this year we spent £2.5 billion, or the government has, on flood defences for 60,000 houses. The Environment Agency says that by 2050 there'll be 8 million properties at risk from flooding. And we know this is an average and soils differ across the country, but if we added about 1% of carbon to the soils across UK agricultural land, which we know how to do, we could store the same amount of water, 6 trillion litres, it's half of our total annual water use. So actually incentivising farmers to do what we need to do to have resilient food supply is the only affordable way to deal with the flooding issue as well. So there's so much opportunity for holistic economics here.
So you're saying that we know how to turn it around and we know what to do.
Yeah, but you're only going to get what you incentivise. So we need to reward farmers not just for the quantity of what they produce, but for the quality of the ecosystems in which it's grown.
Will, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think what the government do is offer grants and different incentives for farmers to get involved with this. However, that it is made really difficult. I've spoken to a lot of farmers and it's actually quite hard to understand. It's very overwhelming with all of the papers that you have to go through in order to do this. And it's, me and my dad have sat down and looked at it, and it's extremely overwhelming and really, really difficult. And you do want to do it, and you do want to get involved as much as possible. And I know you can employ people to help you to do that, but it kind of, when you've got the struggle of the farm and everything happening on the farm, and then you have to employ someone else to help you do this, there's almost too much going on.
Emma, is that in some ways a way that big corporations could remove some of the burden? Is there a way that they could remove some of the burden from the actual farmers?
I think that's what we're seeking to do. I think we all realise as a food sector we're asking so much of our farmers. We want them to be on the land farming, not sat in an office doing bureaucracy and paperwork and trying to work out where they're going to get their next source of income from and how all these government grants work. And I think we've all seen on Clarkson's farm just quite how complicated that is, and not everybody's got a Charlie who can come in and do all that for them. So absolutely, that's something we want to do as a business. How can we provide incentives that government might not be, so we can help farmers to continue innovating. But I think we've also seen, of course, government incentives have been taken away quite quickly, and that's a big challenge for farmers. So there's a role for the whole sector really to look at how do we prop them up? How do we keep that innovation and that incentive path going? And it's not easy, but certainly working together is really important.
100%. I think one of the scariest things is actually the government actually want you to diversify. So we've got bits in our ground which we don't farm for soil health and for natural habitats and different things like that. But I know farms which are almost blocking up their farm, not farming it, no crops, no livestock, because they're actually earning more money not farming, which seems really hard to understand. But if you look in the grand scheme of things, and if you go down the line 10, 15, 20 years, the scariest thing I think for maybe my kids or future farmers is there actually going to be anything to farm? What happens if we get in a position where there's not enough food and there's not enough crops that you're making or meat that you're selling?
Do you fear that we will get to that point?
I think, it's definitely conversations that I have with different farmers and in the household with my dad. It's the way that we're going. There is a shortage in food, not necessarily just in our country, but around the world as well.
And Andy, about this, the point about you were saying being forced to diversify.
You're not being forced because you don't necessarily have to do it, but the incentive of the money, you'd earn more money not farming some aspects of the ground than farming, if that makes sense.
And did you recognise that?
Well, I think it's all, I do. And I think it's all part of this long shadow that sees nature and food in opposition. And this is the fundamental thing that we've got to get away from. And from when all of these agro-environmental schemes were released in the 80s, often with good intentions, but the premise was, if you want more nature, you need less food. But actually, what we know is that nature and food have to go hand in hand. The only resilience that we can have is when you have food-producing fields that are full of life, and that above-ground life becomes below-ground life, and therefore resilience and rainfall infiltration, all the rest of it. So in the Wildfarmed fields last year, we measured with Bristol University. There were 3.7 times as many bumblebees. There was twice the insect biomass. But this is fields that are producing wheat. So we've got to get beyond this food versus nature thing, because otherwise, as Will's saying, you end up in a situation where this perception of a need for biodiversity recovery means land being taken out of production and farmers' livelihoods being threatened. And again, it's just we've got to change the economics so the two can go hand in hand.
And I guess on that, it's also a mindset shift for the whole sector, because we're so used to these beautiful, neat fields of one crop, and you see one big tractor goes through it. Actually, we know we never see a monoculture in nature, ever. If you leave nature, lots of different species will come back because they've all got a job to do. And what we need to relook at is, in farming, nature can play a role, and it can do a job that can stop a farmer having to use synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. And so it's about how we bring nature and farming back together. And on your point earlier, the government went a bit too far. They were like, quick, we need to do something on nature, because sadly the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries on earth. That's a devastating statistic. And they incentivise the planting of wildflowers, but in a way that then stopped food growing. So they went too far one way, they're readjusting and coming back. But I think it's hearing from farmers about how do we find that middle ground, and then the role that we as business can play to help do that as well.
Yeah, I think it's working just as a collaborative, not going from one extreme to the next extreme sort of thing, finding that middle ground that works for everybody.
I think the diversification for farmers, it shouldn't have to be, gîtes or glamping. The diversification for farmers should be our resistance to flooding, resilient food supply, nature gains, and climate resilience.
Okay, let's move to AI, because that's the buzzword, isn't it? Or two words, actually. How do each of you see the technology transforming traditional methods of farming? If we start with you, first of all, Will.
Yeah, I think we've seen an absolute heap. I think one of the main reasons is actually the amount of people going into farming. You're not getting the amount of workers that you were getting, or the amount of people that actually want to farm, because, to be quite honest, it's a very lonely, sad, stressful life. You're
not selling it there.
I know. I know, but realistically, it is. It's really, really difficult, and that's why I feel like it's actually really hard to encourage people to come into farming. And I think it's all to do with the support. So with AI and technology and different things, it's making life easier for the farmer. For example, you've got robotic milkers who milks your cows. We've just got this new machine which is called a Depari, and we haven't used it yet, but me and my dad are very excited to. It's this whole machine that does it. The sheep work for sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. It does the sheep work for you. So all you have to do is stand at the back of the pen, push the sheep in, and I don't understand how it works, but it weighs the sheep. It can tell you how much food that it needs, how much it doesn't need, how long until it needs to get sold, and all of these different things, which is, I'm trying to still get my head around it, but makes life easier for a farmer. And it's going definitely in the right way, because you don't actually need to employ anyone, or you don't need to get people on, which on one hand is really good, but then on the other hand is quite sad, because you do want to see the next generation and the younger kids coming through and farming.
Would you say it's making farming sexy again? AI?
The AI?
Yeah.
I think the farmers are making farmers sexy again. But
What's the question? Are farmers sexy again?
Is
AI making farming sexy?
Possibly, yeah, maybe a little bit, because you're not doing as much work. You're not getting stressed. You can just, I don't know, sit back like I was in South Africa, have your top off, and get a bit of a tan. But, making farming sexy or encouraging people, social media, there's so many farmers now on social media, and it's just really lovely to see. And it's really interesting as well, because a farmer watching another farmer, I can steal their little tips and tricks that they do and what they do on the farm. So, it is really good.
Oh, that's really interesting, stealing tips on social media. Andy, your take on AI and whether it is a force for good or evil in your sphere?
I think, like in farming and everything else, it could be either. And, you can see a path where you basically take this kind of reductionist approach of agriculture over the last 7 years, this kind of chemically based, kind of like single variable science, which is just not how nature works, and applying our technology to kind of continuing down that road, which would be a shame. But I think you can also see the huge opportunity for three main things. One is monitoring. And so, for example, if you want to keep crops healthy like you do with humans through them eating well, getting a balanced diet, making sure the micronutrients are in place rather than reactively trying to treat them with pesticides or in human case antibiotics, you need to do a blood test. So there's a thing called a SAP test for plants, and that's been around for a while, but you take the leaves off and you send it off to a laboratory, and the laboratory's in Holland, and after Brexit that's a pain in the arse, and all this stuff. And now we're looking at the ability to do that in the field with a handheld device, and that allows you to, in real time, make sure the micronutrients are there for crop health, or in measuring. So we're saying to people, farmers can combine nature and food production in the same place at the same time. The bee numbers that I mentioned to you before, and the insect biomass doubling and stuff like that. So we've been measuring that using pan traps, so basically bowls with a bit of water and a fairy liquid in, but Bristol University style, so a bit more official than that, but it's basically that idea. But that's very labour intensive, and students are counting the insects and identifying them and everything else. So this year we're correlating those with AI listing devices that can distinguish insects by their wing beats. And so that's a sort of scalable version of just plonking it in the field, leaving it there. Data's upload is automatic, and farmers have the information they need to prove what they're doing for nature.
Emma, the potential's incredible, isn't it?
It's huge, as they pointed out. I think, and it's about us applying it in the right way. AI is never going to replace farmers or what needs to be done in farming, but we can use it to really exciting to try and take away that admin burden as much as possible. The two things I guess farmers value the most is time and kind of managing risk, because they're the two big things. And if we can use AI wisely for that, and then similar for us as a business, we've been deploying technology for a long time, whether it's in palm oil producing countries where we can use satellite monitoring to identify future risks of deforestation. So we're not having to look at them after the fact, but we can get ahead and try and predict it and avoid it. That's really powerful. Right through to, as Andy mentioned, bioacoustics, where you can almost apply a stethoscope to the soil and hear the biodiversity in the soil, and then start to predict how well that means your soil is responding to regenerative practices. The possibilities seem endless at the moment, but I think it's about finding the right solutions that give farmers better choices and that manage that risk for them.
And in terms of sustainable farming, do you think that farmers have enough incentive to pursue that route at the moment?
Well, I don't think sustainability is enough. I mean, given the state of the ecosystems that we have now, we have to regenerate. I mean, that's why the term was coined back in the 80s, actually, that we have to kind of push things forward rather than stay where we are. But in terms of, moving things in the right direction, whatever the word, no. I mean, at the moment, if you have a couple of fields next to each other, and one has contributed to river pollution, the other one hasn't. One has done nothing for nature, the other one has restored it. One has been a source of carbon emissions and one has been a carbon sink. The grain from those two fields, I'm speaking grain terms for now, same applies for everything, has exactly the same value in the market. Exactly the same value in the market. So the only reason for a farmer to move from A to B is because you can make a very good economic case for using fewer inputs, for restoring your soil health and so on and so on. But doing that when you're in the fourth year of consecutively wild weather, you're absolutely up here in financial strain. You've got 24 hours before it rains. You're standing in the field by yourself. I've been there on the farm in France. Like, how can you possibly be expected to take a radical leap into a whole cultural shift? And that's why I think doing it as part of a community is just critical.
Mm. And Emma, how are corporations encouraging farmers to be sustainable? What sort of incentives are you providing?
Mm. Well, we completely agree with Andy here. It's not about, sustainability is about doing less harm and getting things in balance. We're way beyond that. We don't want to sustain a broken food system, so we absolutely need to restore it, we need to regenerate it. And for us, that means putting more back than we take out. So it's everything we've been talking about. And the role we have as a business is to try and work with our supply chain and our farmers to say, right, what do you need? How do we do this? It's about us giving value to those holistic benefits. So how do we support that carbon restoration or that nature regeneration or the water resilience that's coming? And that's something we're looking at. So a really good example is with our dairy supply chain. We pay a sustainability bonus, which farmers can opt into or opt out, but it gives them an extra price premium for those extra practices they're doing to regenerate. And even then in a volatile commodity time when their milk price might crash, they're still getting that sustainability payment. And it helps to keep them on track, see that we're invested with them and provide them that incentive to move in that direction. And I think we're looking at and how we do that in other crop systems and things like that. We've got a lot to learn. Nobody has the answers to this yet, but we know the direction has to be towards more regenerative agriculture.
Will, do you think we're far enough down the road of progress in this area?
I feel like there's a lot more that can be done. Speaking from a farmer, kind of like on the ground working, Andy did say it, like you need that collaboration. Like if you're outside in the pouring rain, absolutely working as hard as you can, trying to provide food, it's really difficult, and you do. A lot of the farmers that I speak to do want to make change, and they would want to make all the changes. However, it is really, really difficult when you don't see a change in price. Because at the end of the day, it's a business. You want to turn as much money as possible for the business, and it's really, really important to do that. But then also, you want to turn money and make a profit, and you also want to do good. So it's just finding that balance and that collaboration. And it feels like sometimes with farmers, you're alone and you're on your own, and you don't feel like sometimes you're getting as much support and backing as possible. But I guess working with companies like this, you do feel that.
And is that something that you experience? Do you feel that you're isolated and you're alone, and that you don't have maybe as much support as you feel that you need?
Well, not anymore, but I certainly did. For the 10 years when I was farming in France, and I was trying to find a way back to sort of how do we combine nature and food production, and trying all kinds of different cropping techniques and experiments and prototypes and all sorts of stuff. And time and time again in this sort of supposedly hyper-connected world, I found myself either just sort of staring another failure in the face by myself, or contemplating the best step forward by myself. And then you get to the end of all that, and then you go to sell the wheat or whatever it is you're growing. And if your thing worked and you grew it in a way which is better for nature, better for water, better for everybody, it's not worth anymore. So it can be very, very dispiriting. So what we want to try and solve with Wildfarmed was get rid of the loneliness, a collective sense of mission, and make sure that it is worth more.
And Will, how do you see farming evolving in terms of encouraging the next generation to want to take this up as a profession? I mean, your description before really was not selling farming in any shape or form.
No, I feel like farming is definitely changing for the better. I feel like the main factor is, the younger generation that is coming through they're a lot more aware. It's really difficult trying to, even my dad, who's 59 years old, trying to explain to him, because what farmers are, you've learned from your dad, and their dad has learned from their dad, and so on. So actually all of the information that you get has just been passed down a generation to the next generation to the next generation. So it's, back then it's really difficult to go and get the information and bring it back home and be like, yes, let's make this change because this is better. However, I feel like with the younger generation coming through, we're a lot more eager to make change, and we do want to make change. That's at the whole ball of things. You want to know what you're putting into your body is good, and you want to know what you're providing and making is also good.
Mm-hmm. And that's really good to hear that, because we do try and work with young farmers, and I was lucky enough to meet with this wonderful young farmer called Jess up in Cumbria, who's 18, maybe 19 now, and works in the milk, and she just absolutely loves it. And you see her passion for the animals and the passion she has for taking on the family farm, and she's challenging her dad and her parents who've been running this place for so long, and it's really great to see. And I think we need more of that, because we for us as a business, we're dependent on the next generation of farmers. If people don't want to enter this sector, that's going to be really challenging for us to source food that we need to feed the nation.
Andy, how do you make it attractive?
Make it sexy.
Yeah. Present company.
Take your top off and go and love that.
Well, that's Will's version. My version is playing records. So at the Groundswell conference, which is the big sort of regen ag conference. That tells its own story, actually, and that's gone the years that I've been going from a couple of thousand people to 10,000 people. And it's become this tradition of the Wednesday night rave with yours truly on the turntables.
Oh, wow.
But it is like
We were there.
amazing.
We were there, yeah.
Were you?
Yeah.
It's an amazing moment of kind of togetherness. And I think, it's ultimately growing quality food in nature-rich landscapes is the best job in the world. And if we can create an environment where that's rewarded, then I don't think we'll have any problems finding farmers to do it.
Very, very positive note to end on. I want to know the next date for the next rave. I've never been. Right, so at this point, we'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience. We might have some online as well. Is there anyone in the audience?
My question's kind of about bringing the next generation in. So I think there's a challenge in the industry, isn't there, in terms of the age demographic in farmers, and I guess with all of the different competing jobs that you can go out and do in the world, maybe agriculture doesn't always seem the most attractive. But I think your point, Andy, around it's one of the most rewarding, and the connection to nature and food is really important and gives people a lot of purpose in life. I think for the three of you as panelists, you're from three kind of different situations. So, Emma, the trust that Nestlé has built as a brand and the scale that it has globally, Will kind of engaging on a different platform with younger farmers and probably a lot of people that have nothing to do with agriculture. Then I guess, Andy, your journey to kind of building what is, I guess, a disrupting brand within the marketplace. How do you see the position you sit in the supply chain in agriculture, kind of empowering people to come in, and guess what's the experiences that you have as the best way to encourage that kind of next generation into the industry?
Andy, do you want to kick off?
It's always me first.
Oh, sorry. Will, do you want to kick off?
Yeah. I think there's so many different things. I try to do it by online. Is just showing people it's actually, it is difficult, but like anyone can do it. I brought my girlfriend onto the farm and I put her through her paces and taught her all about farming. Not that she had a choice, but I was like, oh, you've got to do this with me. And it is, it's putting it out to the masses. I think it would be really interesting if we could actually get farming taught and agriculture taught in schools so people can understand, because I feel, with me growing up, I came from a family farm, so I had the privilege of being like, this is what I was going to do. But someone who doesn't come from a family farm was, at careers days or different things like that. Farming wasn't actually something that was spoken about, which I would like to change and have that as an option that people can go down if they want to encourage people to go in, like go to different farms, go to farm parks, like yourself, you'll open it up to 400 or 800 people across 2 days, which is just fantastic. I think it's so important actually getting to a farm and seeing what happens and seeing where your food comes from. And hopefully that would inspire you to maybe take part in it one day.
I think it's about getting people to seeing is believing is absolutely true, and whether that's for the next generation coming in, and also just helping young people know where their food comes from. We did some research showing that nearly 60% of consumers just don't have any connection to where their food comes from or those rural places, and that they actually feel disconnected from nature. And that's a big challenge in a world of maybe sometimes too much social media, what we heard on the previous panel, etc. So connecting them, but not just young people. We took our senior leadership team in Nestlé, who spend a lot of time in offices and fancy conference rooms and things, but taking them to a farm to understand where the ingredients come from that make the products that help their business to run was so empowering, and helped them really connect and understand why we've got these commitments towards regenerative agriculture and why Nestlé want to play a leadership role in really leading the charge to make that happen.
I agree. And I think that alongside the seeing is believing point, our experience has been, I think there's just a universal yearning for purpose across the, I'm just not talking within the food system, but just in general at the moment. And this is such an opportunity to sort of coalesce that need for purpose. And what we've found is that going out there with a mission, and a mission that could be such a game changer in terms of all of the major problems which are afflicting our society at the moment, and joining the dots up to make it collaborative so the whole supply chain is linked. What we found is the response from everyone up and down that supply chain in food businesses large and small has been just to go the extra yard all the time to try and help make this work. So I think if we can build a sense of collaboration again, we can move mountains.
Okay, let's take an online question now, directed to Andy and Will. To what extent do you perceive the British consumer's desire for cheap food is hindering farmers' ability both to make a profit and also make the transition to regenerative agriculture? Do you sense consumer sentiment is changing?
You want to say that one?
They're looking at each other.
There's so many bits to that, aren't there? I mean, it's we know that the price of food is not the true cost of food. That actually you can take, whether it's a national food strategy or any number of these studies, the actual cost of food today is, trillions. Ultimately, it's costing us the earth. No species survives the death of its ecosystem, so you can put whatever price on that you want, really. And we're a country that's about to spend half of its budget on the NHS, and on it goes. So the cheap food that we have is an illusion. On the other hand, such is the state of economics in many families across the UK, that increasing the price of food in the supermarket overnight is not an option. So concentrating on our bit of it, which is not the processing, it's the growing, like how do we try and solve this conundrum? Well, first thing is that consumers can't possibly engage if they don't know who grew their food and how they grew it. How can they? You walk into a supermarket, you've got all this choice. Knowing who grew it is not a choice you've got. So from our perspective, like traceable supply chain is number one, otherwise people can't engage. And number two is that if farmers can be rewarded not just for the tons that they produce, but for the other stuff they've done. So like our farmers are getting paid now by water companies because the water companies are making more money stopping pollution at source than trying to get pollution out afterwards. So if you imagine farmers paid for water quality, paid for nature, as well as their grain, then you can be in a situation where farmers are making more money, it's less risky, and the price of food doesn't have to go up.
Well,
yeah, I think something. If I take you back, farmers actually used to get paid for producing food. So if you had an animal or had a crop, you did get paid for selling it. Now you don't, and I think that's really interesting. If you can actually work as a collaboration and be like, this food or this crop was grown correctly and well, then you could get rewarded. I think that would be such an amazing position to be in. But I think a massive problem as well is importing food, cheap food that you can sell on the shelves for cheaper. You have no idea where that food is coming from. You have air miles alongside of that as well. It is really important in supermarkets and different things like that, of knowing where your food has come from and what has happened to your food, how it was grown, how it was produced.
okay, let's take another question from the floor. Lady over there, fourth row.
It feels like plant-based food has quite a strong sustainability narrative to it, like naturally. I wondered what you think can be done for meat, and if farming of livestock and selling on for meat has a place in sustainable farming. What kind of changes are happening that might, if people wish to keep eating meat, help them feel like they're not doing a really bad thing sustainability-wise?
I think that's a great question, and Will, you can talk about it more, but we all know meat has been demonised in some ways, and that's challenging. But if you actually look at the principles of regenerative agriculture, and for us as Nestlé, one of those core principles is the integration of livestock. Because you look at any natural system in nature, livestock is involved, whether through kind of animals being there, whether that's the bison across the plains or whatever it is. We rely on animals to refertilise and make the land better. So it's absolutely essential in regen agriculture. So for us, it's about the integration, making sure they're part of the system. And also, I think looking at, we know maybe the meat system has maybe got too big in some areas, and it's about right-sizing it, so that less and better. Meat is important. It's an important part of people's diets across the world. How do we make sure the meat we're producing is the better meat and we're getting rid of the worst offending stuff?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think from a farmer's point of view as well, actually getting the knowledge on this, because I know a lot of farmers who don't actually understand it, and there's not as much out there for them, like setting up little meetings and different things like that. If it's at a pub or at a hall for farmers to go to and understand it, would be a great way for them to do better as well.
Well, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this sort of demonising of meat. What's your perception of that?
Yeah, 100%. I think there is a sense of demonising on meat and, on farmers as well, because, a lot of people probably do have a vision that farmers are cruel and they don't treat their animals well and they don't do the right thing, when in fact, if you would go to a farm and speak to a farmer and see how they treat animals and even crops and how they do farm, it's all from a loving way. It's all from the love of their heart sort of thing. And the best, what my dad always said to me when I was growing up is like, farming is a way of life. You do it because you love to do it.
So is that an open invitation for everyone here to your farm?
Oh, 100%. We've got loads of pets. We are actually in the process of that. Me and Jessie are just buying a farm, and we would love to be in a position to actually open it up to the public, more aimed actually at schools, for kids to come and learn about the farm and what happens on a farm, but just in a very fun way.
Brilliant. Another question, please. Gentleman there.
Thank you. Nestlé has a commitment to source more of our products from regenerative farms, so like yours, Andy. We know that most farming in the country is conventional, not regenerative. I'm interested in your thoughts, and it's again, going back to the consumer, to what extent do you think consumer awareness, understanding of the issues and their demand is needed to power that transition to more regenerative farming? Or are there other factors, that are bigger and more challenging?
Time for me? I think it needs to be, the fact of the matter is that most people have never heard of the word yet. So I think we need to do a staged process whereby those of us who have the time and the opportunity to talk about these things a lot and understand the importance of it, and that this is a situation from which everyone will win, should lead the charge and give people a choice and begin to explain that choice. And of course, as soon as we start doing that, we're confronted with the fact that not all regenerative is created equal. And then you get into the whole nightmare of should it be certified and not certified? And there's hundreds of eco labels already, and the consumers that don't need another one. And what do we do? And I think that we're a really exciting point in that, because when we were confronted with this problem from a wild farm perspective, regenerative is healthy or natural, anyone can use it, and a lot of people are. We decided to drop the wild farm standards, which were these kind of audited practices. Following the organic model, your farmers can do this and they can't do that, and someone else is checking. But as soon as you draw a line in the sand about what can and can't be done, just from my perspective, the years of experiments as to how to bring nature and food together, it's evolving all the time. So you inevitably get behind the curve. And the thing that we've got now, thanks to the AI wing beat listeners, the soil acoustics, water measurement techniques, which I won't bore you with the details of here, but we've got these 4 or 5 measurements that are easy, scalable, affordable, and ultimately allow us to certify regenerative by its outcomes rather than by its practices. And I think that just adds a whole level of farmer flexibility, but also says to the consumers, it's a very easy message. You've got 3.7 times as many bees, you've got no water pollution, you've got 2/3 reduced carbon emissions, and in our case, your grain is pesticide-free. There you go. It's a much more straightforward proposition, I think.
And I think that's part of our job, isn't it? Is how we communicate it. Even the words regenerative agriculture, that's 9 whole syllables of language before you've even really explained what it is. And as soon as you're having to explain, you've lost your consumer. So something we think about a lot is consumers at the moment won't necessarily thank us for doing this, but they'll certainly punish us if we don't in the long term. So part of this is about us knowing this is the way forward. This is about building resilience and making sure we can source these ingredients into the future and securing our farming base and our value chain. How then we engage and explain and bring to life things that consumers do care about, which are birds and bees and nature and also farmer livelihoods. That's when we can start this really exciting storytelling. And I think we're just getting started. I think there's lots more that can be done.
I'm going to take an online question similarly along those lines. Emma, if you can address this one. Talking about nature and biodiversity and all its benefits, it's quite complex in terms of measurement. How can it be discussed with consumers? Is it possible or appropriate to make it simple?
Very good question. I think Andy's kind of highlighted this. It's about some of those key simple metrics that people can understand. And I guess that's where it's really exciting for my team as a sustainability team to work with our marketing colleagues and our communications colleagues to bring these things to life. But we've done lots of things that we think already we're seeing. I mean, on KitKat, we talk about breaks for good. And really that's about the work we've been doing in places where we source cocoa from. We've also done a huge amount of work around the milk plan and bringing to life dairy farmers for consumers. And we get incredibly positive responses. So I think we just need to do more of that. And brands like Wildfarmed are actually making it trendy. They've got a very cool, bright green.
There you go.
Yeah.
But I think it's good. And we have to. It doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah, I think that one of the sort of step changes that we had was, in fact, go back a step. When I started doing some stuff with Jeremy Clarkson, he told me about this scene from Serengeti Rules. And it's a guy who was taking starfish out of rock pools. And the long short of it is that when the starfish went out of the rock pool, the number of species in the rock pool halved. So what are the key indicators of ecosystem health? And so you can get really complicated sort of monitoring bats and birds and all kinds of things. But ultimately, if we can double insect biomass, we know that all the rest is going to flow. And we know that insects respond incredibly locally to the changes that you make. So one of the big breakthroughs that we had, we were thinking, well, how are we going to do this? Because at the moment, you have these really expensive ecological baseline surveys that is the preserve of people who can afford it. For a tenant farmer like me, most of the farmers, that's not going to happen. But hang on, we can measure every year relative to the nearest conventional field. That's easy, because then you put a pan trap in one, a pan trap in the other, and you get the difference that allows for that year's weather and all the other variables. And then you can see immediate change and you can make it affordable. So I think we can make it simple.
OK, we'll take another online question, I think to you, Will. With high land prices that young people can't easily afford and new taxes making farmers sell their land, what do you think the farming industry will look like in 20 years? Fewer but bigger farming businesses, a shift from smaller independent farms to larger farming businesses and cooperative farms?
Oh, there's a lot in there. Yeah, it's really difficult, and I think the scariest thing is the inheritance tax for family farms like myself. It's a really scary position to be in. I feel like a lot of families are actually having to sit down and talk about it a lot more than they had to before, because the future of the farm could just disappear. It's in a really, really scary place for family farms. Just to give you an example, there's actually a lot of ground by us that has just been bought up by big businesses and big corporations who actually don't farm it. And it's actually a massive shame, especially with what's going on at the moment with a drought. Like, we've got sheep in fields, and the grass situation isn't amazing. We have fields next to us which have just been bought up and they're just fallow. They're basically just left there, just waiting until they can basically build houses on there. So from that point of view, it's really, it's really sad, and it's really difficult to say where the future is going to be in 20 years' time from that point of view, because, with family farms and it getting passed down generations to generations, farmers are going to get forced into selling ground and selling pieces of ground off in order to afford it. So from that point of view, it is in quite a scary place.
OK, should we take another question from the floor at the front?
So, yeah, we've heard a lot about the challenges, and I think that highlights it perfectly. And I would agree that DJing in Love Island sounds a lot easier than farming does. If there was a message for everyone here to take away, what are you hopeful about or excited for as you look into the next, I'm not going to ask you for the next 20 years, but the next 5 years?
I think that, coming from, a family farm, like the collaboration, I think there's a lot more opportunity to collaborate now. That's probably the most exciting thing, you know, for me and my family has been able to collaborate with different companies or different people because the opportunity's there. When, you know, back when my dad was probably my age and growing up, it was a little bit more isolated. So, you know, moving forward for the next 5, 10, 20 years, the collaboration is actually really exciting and promising.
Emma, what are you most excited
Really glad you said that, because if I go to any conference, we normally play a game with the team to call bingo when you hear the word collaboration is key, because it is, but we're not seeing it enough. So hearing that it's happening is really great. I think for me it's about connection and recognising that before, years ago, we wouldn't have been connected to our farmers and our supply chains in the way we are, and now we're reconnecting. And I think we're doing that across the sector, recognising we all want the same thing. We want a future food system that is healthy, abundant, resilient, and is supporting people. And I think we can only do that by connecting. So